I've actually taken a Bitcoin-backed loan to buy real estate.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to today's episode of the Collecting Keys Real Estate Investing Podcast. This is the show where we teach you to make massive income, not just passive income with your real estate investing business. And I am Mike DeHaan here with my co-host Dan Austin and Dylan Cook. And on this show, we're going to start with a quick little announcement of our kind of like, a couple changes we're having going on with the show. And so if you've been listening to this show at all over the last, several years now, because we've been doing this for over 3 years, we've traditionally done 3 episodes a week for the last, almost 2 years. I think we've been doing that, Dan, since 2022. So we've been doing interviews on Monday. We do this off-market operator radio show on Wednesdays, and then we've been doing these Friday focuses. And we are going to be changing things a little bit going forward, starting next week, where we are just going to have 2 shows a week. We're going to have this kind of general show with me, Dylan, and Dan come out on Tuesdays, and then we're going to keep the Friday focus on Tuesdays because I like the cadence there. It has like a little bit of a better spread than being like Wednesday and Friday.
This is a change to me. I didn't even know. Okay,
it's going to be coming out on Tuesdays, and then we're going to be dropping the interviews just for the time being because honestly, our interview shows don't usually do quite as well as the other shows, mostly because we reach a point where the guests, they are bringing less value. It's harder to find good guests. Every single person that pitches us to come on the show is some kind of like syndicator or someone that is trying to sell some education thing, or they are like someone who got rich before the boom or during the boom and they haven't done shit for the last 3 years. And A, those aren't very fun for us to do, those conversations, and B, nobody wants to hear them anyway. And so instead, we decided to spend more time trying to make this show a little bit better, getting some better Friday focus content put together for you guys. And then if we do find a good guest, we'll just bring them on here to connect with the 3 of us. We can have a good group conversation instead of doing the traditional interview style. And also, too, just big picture, there's enough freaking interview podcasts. If you want to go listen to interviews with random schmucks who pretend like they have value for you, go listen to any other show. Just like go on your podcast app and just fucking pick one, and it'll probably be an interview with somebody that you don't really care what they're going to say, but you can sit in your car and pretend like you're learning something, even though it's a complete waste of your time. So there we go. That's a change you're going to be seeing over the next little bit. And so with that being said, if you have specific topics you would like us to go over on this Wednesday show, you want to get our takes on things, you want to get kind of like our views on different things that you're seeing in your business or you're seeing in the real estate space in general, or just the economy, we are going to be trying to have some more informed, detailed discussions on this now Tuesday show. Just let us know what you want to hear and we'd be happy to dive into stuff. Right on.
It's funny because I threw on the Better Life podcast today. The latest episode is titled 100K passive income a year with this overlooked real estate niche. Then it got 5 minutes in and they introduced a guy as sober living, and I immediately turned it off.
Who cares? Nobody cares about that. We've all heard it. It's all the same people that are doing the same thing. They always have some random shtick that they're trying to, it's like, and there's more pitch you at the end. I don't know, man. It's just, it doesn't need to be that way. So,
I think podcasts in general are hopefully switching over because people are just kind of bored with the typical podcast structure and tell me about yourself and all this sort of stuff. And it's kind of, I don't know what it's moving towards. I haven't been listening to a lot of various podcasts recently, but the ones that I do follow seem to be more like what we're doing here. Just super educated dudes like us talking about things we're smart about.
That's where it's good. And you're right, Dylan, they're not super relatable, right? When you get some of those people, especially like so often you get those people that are on their shows and they're obviously like professional podcast guests at this point. Like the stories they tell, they're not, there's no spirit behind them because they've told the same goddamn story over and over and over again the same way. And like for me, I think the only shows I listen to, I have a couple comedy podcasts I listen to, because I like to like study how they deliver. And like, honestly, I get pretty good news from comedy podcasts because they make jokes about whatever the current events are. And so it's a good way to kind of like know what's going on without falling into like the mass media freaking wormhole. And then I listen to Hermosi, but his shows are literally just monologues of him talking about whatever the hell he wants to with business. And I don't know, 50% of the episodes, kind of stuff I know, 50% I'll pick up like little tidbits that I really like. And that's what I go for. It works out great. So
I didn't know you listened to Shirmozy stuff.
I haven't talked about that much.
So-
And, I definitely don't share our stuff and his stuff in Slack saying you guys should listen to this ever. So, yeah.
Check out this episode.
Well, Hormozy's putting in
Of
the effort
course.
to make it good.
Yeah.
It
for
is.
his
Yeah,
brand,
he does a
right.
good
Like
job.
every other else is just doing a monologue. It's their first take
Yep.
of whatever popped into
Yeah.
their head during that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's
Right.
also like somebody that has a legitimate track record that is verified. He's very, very seasoned in experience, and he doesn't like have some super special secret thing that he figured out and got lucky with, and is now just like trying to be a podcast guy.
And he'll
Absolutely.
tell you that too.
Yeah.
He's like, this isn't sexy.
Yeah.
This.
So,
Yeah.
So
It's true.
authenticity goes a long way.
And so for this show today, something that we wanted to dive into, we're 2 weeks out. I guess when this comes out, it'll be 3 weeks out from the election. And there has been this big shift towards, I don't know, I'd say this big rising of Bitcoin has popped up a lot in general media. There are even things like companies like, what were you saying, Dan? Microsoft is looking at holding like some of their reserve cash in Bitcoin and all these different things. And when it comes to crypto stuff, I always feel like it's like a shiny object thing that people that are investors, business owners kind of like think about. Some people dabble in it, some people don't. But Dylan, you're super into Bitcoin. And so our thought with this show today was to kind of hear from you why you believe in it as somebody who studied it a lot, as someone who has a lot invested in Bitcoin, as someone who's been in the game for a while. Because I know for me personally, I was buying Bitcoin and crypto years and years ago, 2016, 17, 18. I sold pretty much all of it to start my real estate game. And I haven't really thought much about it since. And so it's a lot more developed since back then. Back then it was pretty shady. Honestly, like where we used to buy a lot of these random coins and shit. So I guess for this show, Dylan, you want to give us like your elevator pitch, how you think Bitcoin connects to real estate and like the larger economic picture that we're going to be seeing over the next 4 years and beyond with the Trump administration and everything else. But
Yeah, I will do my best because this can go a thousand different ways. But to start, I mean, there's a schematic going around social media right now that basically says, 2012, the median home price was 50,000 Bitcoin, whatever it was. 2016, it was, 20,000. It just keeps going down and down and down. Whereas the cost of real estate in dollar terms has gone up significantly, since the past 10, 20 years. Right. So let's say on average, we've had a 200% increase in home prices over the past 10 years. But if you would denominate those home prices in Bitcoin instead of in dollars, you're actually down, right? Like your cost got cheaper. And so
assuming
next year,
you had Bitcoin then.
Assuming you had Bitcoin. Right, exactly.
I don't have Bitcoin, so how can that help me?
Okay, we're starting with the premise here, Dan.
Okay.
So basically it's like changing the denominator, and people would argue that it's not real estate that's going up, it's a dollar that's losing value because of economic policies set forth really, the past couple of decades, but really since, COVID in 2020. So tying it is like, what's a better store of value is really like what it comes down to in forms of real estate. Whereas real estate, obviously you can leverage, it provides cash flow, tax depreciation, etc. Whereas Bitcoin is just supply and demand at this point. There's only ever going to be a fixed amount of Bitcoin, which is 21 million coins. And the last one isn't mined until 2140. And that
say
issue
2140
kind
like
of
100 years from now. Okay.
Correct. Yes. And so, but the issuance started and actually, so Bitcoin actually came out in 2009, right? So like it's actually been around for almost 25 years. I don't think a lot of people
Can I ask you
that.
one thing while you're on this topic too?
Yeah.
And when they run out of Bitcoin, if you're the last one with the Bitcoin, what do you do? Do you just lose all that money?
No, you would theorize at that point that it would be part of like basically the global economy, and you would just buy and sell and trade at, as Bitcoin left. Okay. I'm saying that the total issuing supply would just circulate.
But they always say that there's, a certain number of coins, but the problem is you can buy like tiny fractions. Like I could go and buy 5 cents worth of Bitcoin right now.
It can be fractionalized.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I'm misunderstanding the whole coin. Are you saying that because they have the halving, they had one this year, right? So there's 21 million Bitcoin.
Yeah, they did.
Right. So there's 21 million Bitcoin. Right. So are you
So
just
back up a
saying?
second,
Are you
Dan.
just saying they won't mine anymore? There will be no
Yes,
more
that
mine.
is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Well, because
So-
the way, and I appreciate that, Dylan, because the way it's been explained to me in the past is that Bitcoin, as it's mined, it disappears, but it actually doesn't disappear from the economy. It still exists as a coin. You just can't. You can no longer mine it. It's as if
Correct.
all the gold was mined in the earth.
Correct.
Yep.
Exactly. And so in 2009, the issuance was 50 Bitcoin approximately every 10 minutes. And that's just set up on the protocol level. Every 4 years or so, it's actually every 210,000 blocks, but about every 4 years that the issuance could supply in half. So it went from 50 to 25 to 12 and a half to whatever. Currently we're at 3.125 issuance. So it's a very much like reverse exponential decrease in the supply.
You can't just print more.
You can't just print more. And that is protocol driven. And it's driven by what's called like a proof of work mechanism, where people around the globe have these ASIC computers that basically do like these really intense math problems to solve the next block to issue the coins. And that's different from like the proof of stake system, which is like the Ethereums, the Solanas, the chain links, the other big cryptos that are out there, where essentially it's kind of like the US dollar system, where the more dollars you have, the more pull and like just like influence that you have. You know, you can be the largest Bitcoin holder in the world and you cannot change the protocol whatsoever. So that's like one big difference between a lot of the other coins.
But as Dan said, you can run it,
Gotcha.
you can split, right, and do different things. So like I remember back when I was into it, they split and had Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, right, where they were different algorithms.
Correct.
Bitcoin Cash, I don't even know if that's still around or not. But like I don't understand why they can't just do that repeatedly over and over again and essentially reduce the value of the whole thing, especially once the algorithm's done. I mean, and is that their version of inflation?
Well,
right? Except it's like 1 for 1.
No, I don't know if that's their version of inflation. My rebuttal to that argument is the source is still open code. Like that's Litecoin, that's Bitcoin Cash, that's Bitcoin SV. Like all these are just the same code with a little bit of variation of either like the supply issuance changing, et cetera. Like you can change whatever metric that you want. But it's kind of like the explanation for this is like the network effects around Bitcoin. And this, what you're describing, Mike, is a lot bigger risk in the early years than it is today because of how ingrained it would be in today's economy. We have sitting U.S. senators pushing for a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Companies putting it on the balance sheet, Microsoft being one of them is voting on it in December. So has such a political influence now that I would say it's less of a risk than that was 2015 or beyond. And actually, in 2017, there was something called the block size wars, where this was actually a debate on what to do with the protocol. And actually was the reason for some of the split.
So there are major companies like MicroStrategy, never heard of them, but as I was doing my research, that has $4.5 billion of Bitcoin on their balance sheet.
So they're kind of the leading indicator of this. And
Tesla.
Michael Saylor's the CEO. And his thesis was to basically like, I have this company. It spits off 40 million a year in positive cash flow. I've tried everything I can do to grow my company, but I can't really grow it. But because inflation is actually like 20% or whatever it was, you know, he doesn't trust the government metrics, that he's like, I'm sitting on a melting ice cube of cash. He's like, I have $200 million in cash and it's losing power every day. I could buy treasuries. I could buy gold. I could buy other companies, but where do I put this excess reserve? And he found Bitcoin and he deemed it as a reserve asset, or pristine collateral is another terminology that used. So he basically went balls to the wall. He put all those cash reserves in it, started issuing debt, started issuing equity to buy more Bitcoin and put it on its balance sheet. And it actually has been the best performing stock since he's done that in like 2020.
The thing I always get stuck with on this stuff though is what is the...
Sorry, Mike, can I interject? Not to, but you did like the network thing, like Wikipedia is open source. But like no one goes to or no one uses Google or Bing, or other places. So like it just depends how big of like a foothold this technology or protocol has already. HTTP is an internet protocol that's been around for since the 60s, 70s. And like people use that instead of other web interfaces.
Yeah, which makes sense. So I guess like that sort of, I guess, leads to my question is the actual utility of Bitcoin, right, from like an enterprise perspective, because the average Joe Schmo that is buying it, they're buying it and they want the value to go up so they can then sell out and have more USD, right, or more currency wherever they live that they can actually spend. So when they're using it as like this store of value, you want something that is stable. You know, Bitcoin fluctuates in value. It can drop a lot very, very quickly. At least it used to be able to. I think market cap is big enough now that's more stable than it once was. But like I remember back in January 2018 when every cryptocurrency crashed like an insane amount. Like it was like some of them were like 80-90% in like 2 days, right? Bitcoin now I think has a big enough market cap that's not going to happen. But I guess the utility of it, of using it as a store of value, I guess I don't understand why they think that could work if it's not necessarily directly related to the inflation of the US dollar, right? Whereas I would say real estate is more so tied to the inflation of the US dollar, because as the inflation went up, so did the property values directly. It's influenced by interest rates, whereas Bitcoin isn't really tied to anything.
Yeah, I mean, its biggest correlation really has been net liquidity. So like as the Fed does either QE or injections or reverse repo facilities, like honestly has a more of a connection with liquidity than anything else. To your point, like it goes back to the bigger it gets, the safer it is. It's kind of like the Lindy effect, and so these are more risk again earlier in its lifespan. And now that you have the BlackRocks of the world issuing, today was the first day the options even got issued on IBIT, which is the BlackRock ETF. But you have to look at it from at least that 4-year time horizon, because those are those halving cycles. So every 4 years, the supply gets cut in half. While in the meantime, it's kind of getting more ingrained in the economy, and in the demand is increasing. And the other thing I'll say to this is like us as U.S. people who have been on the dollar, who have Venmo, who have PayPal, are less likely to see the utility than maybe some other third world countries. Mike, you're actually probably a good person to ask because you do travel a lot and like deal with maybe Forex currencies. But if you're in El Salvador or some other place that isn't dollarized, like, or you need dollars and can't get them, like Bitcoin is another avenue to do that, where you don't need a trusted middleman like a PayPal or a Western Union or something to transact monetary value.
I think that drives that to home. And I don't remember where I learned this. Could have been from Mike maybe, but I think I learned it when I was back at school, is like in some like African countries, they use SIM cards as currency because cell phone minutes are actually more valuable to them than anything, and they can trade it, right? And so just because of their different towers, different systems, all this stuff, and money goes through hyperinflation cycles and all these, in some of these third world countries in North Africa in particular, that's SIM card. So it's like, it just speaks to, it doesn't matter what it is, like it could be used as a currency.
Yeah. Cigarettes in jail is a big one. But like money as like globally has certain characteristics. That's why gold was used for so long, because it's durable. You can be transported. It retains its value. And, you know, we were on a fixed rate monetary policy up until 1971. And the whole world was like rhinestones was a global thing for a while. So like, if you look at the history of monetary policy, you know, sound money or being tied to some kind of commodity has always been the case until 1971. So actually these 50, 60 years that we've had of purely fiat currencies and having the US Treasury being like basically the reserve is actually like not the norm. It's just kind of like what we've been doing in everyone's current living lifetime.
Well, I think the argument too for the utility, like I used to be pretty much so in like, well, there's no utility. What are you going to do with it? There's no useful value with this. And really, even like when you go back to gold in modern day has very little value other than like electronics manufacturing and stuff like that. But it's like there is not doing something other than storing value for most applications. Bitcoin really doesn't do anything for utility. But if it's enough people believe it has value, then it doesn't matter what utility it is. Like we could call freaking rocks, some other rock, a store of value, right? And if the majority of people believe in that, which is also why the US dollar has been kind of the one thing that everything's kind of tied to in the world economy, is because enough people believe in it.
And that's kind of like, honestly, the tricky thing for me with Bitcoin and crypto is, you're right, it has to be based around belief, and there's no like actual deciding government around it who's deciding that it has value, right? Because, you know, some people think Pokemon cards have a certain amount of value. Some people think Beanie Babies, right? They had, was it the daffodils was that the Netherlands? Was it daffodils, whatever the flower was that...
you're talking about
tulips?
the tulip
where they were like trading tulips for like insane money, right? Like I was just in...
Yeah, but unlike tulips, like they die, right? That was just dumb from the start.
I mean, like I don't know, they can be reproduced.
Bitcoin, dude.
Yeah, Bitcoin technically has a death date, 2140 or whatever you said. But I mean, like it's all relative though. You know, like I was just in Laos a few weeks ago, which is technically one of the poorest countries in the world if you look at it compared to a standard monetary policy. But while I was there, it's because they trade goods, right? Goods and services. They don't use money. Like we were on this longboat going through the river there to get to this town that we were going to stay in. And we watched this other boat roll up, and they just like traded a fish for a freaking empty Pepsi bottle full of crickets, right? And a jug of water. Like that was their means of exchange. Is that's for them is a equivalent value, right?
Right, but that's not like that's an apples and oranges comparison to something that's the size of like the U.S. economy. So like, barter was done for us too, but because of its inefficiencies of everything you just described, like you couldn't have a U.S. economy run on barter.
Yeah,
no, and you can't tax bartering, right? And so that's the challenge is the taxation with you have to have taxation to run the government to all that sort of stuff. So that also drives.
Yeah, when if you're looking at the large U.S. economy, that's for sure. That's totally different, right? But most people aren't looking at the larger U.S. economy, they're looking at it as a means of direct exchange. Technically, you could buy a house with Pokemon cards. Like, why could you not do that? If both,
right.
Because the receiving party,
but they probably wouldn't.
But if it was like a Pokemon nerd, if it was like Post Malone, he'd probably take your Pokemon
honestly,
cards,
right? But so it comes down to how everyone mutually agrees that it's a mutual exchange of value. And so when it comes to things like Bitcoin, challenges is like there's kind of this has to be like this group adoption and perception, but there's no governing body that actually determines how valuable it is. It all comes down to the perception of the individual.
Which to me, that's a good thing.
So I will
fiat kind of means by decree, and Bitcoin is more of a bottom up phenomenon where I think it's almost more fair in the issuance. Whereas the closest you are to the money printer in the United States, the better off you are. The wealth get wealthier for a specific reason. You have good credit, you have access to capital, etc. But if you're somewhere in one of these third world countries that are poor and you were saving in rubies or whatever, and instead you switch your rubies for Bitcoin, and now you went up 10x and you want to escape the country, you can do that as long as you can memorize 12 words in your head. Versus if you just did that with gold, you can't, because there's literally countries that would stop you from taking the gold out of the country.
Yeah.
So you can transfer your wealth anywhere.
Yep.
So I almost think like this adoption curve is happening in places that we don't see as Americans. It's happening in third world countries more and more and more, like El Salvador, who make it legal tender. And eventually we're going to be one of some of the last people that use it because we have the dollar. The dollar will be the last domino to fall.
Again, this argument really hinges upon the majority of people adopting it, which I think we're getting to that point in time where as we get closer and closer to Bitcoin becoming like a thing, it's because a large portion of wealth and people believe in it. But the argument for this is that the American dollar and global currencies or just like local currencies are heavily manipulated by their governments. And so the idea is that Bitcoin itself could be potentially manipulated. But as more and more people adopt it and it becomes more democratized, I think it's less likely that they're going to be able to manipulate it. And like I'll give you like the examples like the U.S. economy, right? Quantitative easing, quantitative tightening, they're just putting money in and out of the economy by buying government bonds or buying mortgage-backed securities. So they're manipulating the value of money, and they're also adjusting interest rates to manipulate it. And then if you look at like the U.S., like we want to say, okay, say we're not doing it to hurt other people. We're just doing it to make our economy stronger. Go to China, where it's very, very well known that they peg the yuan or whatever to American dollars, but then they adjust it and they will not let their currency go above or below a certain value. So they
a peg.
They
exactly.
peg it. And then they also publicly like on purpose devalue their currency and do other things to make it so that they can become a larger exporter to other parts of the world. So they very, very quickly they very tightly manage and manipulate their currencies to only benefit them. So like if you think America's perfect and China's bad, like that's a really good argument for that. But I think America also manipulates their currencies to affect the world economy too.
To your point, like there is self-interest involved when humans are involved. Does it make sense that 14 members of the FOMC committee can make decisions based on the volume or price of money for the rest of the world and everyone comes out equal? No, like it just doesn't, right? But because you can't really change the protocol with Bitcoin, it is a more fair system. The only thing that the supply doesn't move, the only thing that moves is the price. And that'll be based on really the demand that comes with it. And I think that demand is ever increasing. And, if you're looking at what wealthy people do, and if you're trying to tie this to real estate and being an investor, they take asymmetric risks, right? So what can you buy for $90,000 that could potentially be worth $1 million within a decade or two? You can't buy any real estate that does that. right? So even if a lot of people's like questions around this can be solved with position sizing, make it 1% to 2% of your portfolio. If it works out, great. It'll be 50% of your portfolio. If it doesn't, you didn't really lose a whole lot.
Wrap up the argument if you can. It's like a 1-minute pitch of why as Bitcoin gets more and more adopted, it will be less likely than a fiat currency to be manipulated by a government or a very wealthy person.
Because the proof of work mechanism that is usually used to like come to consensus about what the longest chain is, what transactions go in the blockchain, which do not, is ran by decentralized nodes all over the country, right? And so those nodes have to come to a consensus. That would mean that people in Afghanistan, China, Russia, United States, Mexico, all over the world would have to get 51% of the network to basically agree that the actual chain is wrong, right? And that's just very, very unlikely given that the dynamics of how the US, I don't know, like the global economy works.
What about,
because they're so spread out amongst everyone, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot if you said this one is wrong, because if you're a major holder, right, and you said like, okay, we're going to do a 51% attack and make this wrong, the value of the network's going to tank.
Okay.
So like if you're a big holder, why would you do that? You're just going to be shooting yourself in the foot.
So there's no, there's no chance of like a psyops pump and dump scheme by a bad actor or a large country that has a lot of money?
No, not to my opinion. No. And like, I guess the breakthrough here is that everyone's like, Bitcoin is the first blockchain. It can't be the only one because technology, gets advanced on or whatever. But digital money has been tried before. There is DigiMoney, eCash, B-Money, all those kinds of stuff, basically through cryptography in like the late 90s. I don't know that all that much. But because he was able to basically solve digital scarcity is like the term. Whereas like if I send you a photo, you can send it to a million different people. But if I can send you a Bitcoin that is digital, you can verify that it's only in your possession and only in your address. That was like, it's called the double spend problem. That's what people have been spending decades to figure out. And like the proof of work mechanism is what solved that.
Gotcha.
So I don't know if that answered your question, but like that.
Well, I just think about like market
Yeah.
manipulation, which we know happens in places. GameStop was a good example of the little man basically saying, fuck you, we're not going to let you big hedge funds or whatever, tank this company because they're, essentially manipulating the market. So for Bitcoin, for example, could China, US government, Russia do a pump and dump scheme by using real money to buy this stuff, to inflate price, get a huge chunk of people, a large group of people to try to get Bitcoin to 200,000. And once it gets to 200,000, continue to like start selling off. But all that way you're able to strip out all the wealth from lots of parts of the world.
The answer is probably yes.
Okay.
But every time that has historically happened, you've seen more and more people just keep buying the bottom. And we've historically had higher lows with every cycle that we've had. And so this volatility that is obviously very prevalent has gotten diminished every cycle we go through. And I think there will be a breaking point, which it might be this cycle, where because it's so adopted, that volatility range will become less and less and less. Because there's BlackRock's involved now, because Vanguard, or, pick out who you want. You're getting large players now, S&P 500 countries, pensions, wealth funds that are all buying into this now. So can it still happen? Sure. But that doesn't change like any of the other things that could still happen too. Like you could probably try to do that with Apple or Tesla if you wanted to too.
Yeah. I'm just trying to explore this with you guys right now. Is like, what if you were like the Chinese government and you were printing money and putting it in a bank account? So it never went into the economy, but you had this bank account where you're printing money, dumping in there, and then over a long period of time, like built up this gigantic bank account and then started buying Bitcoin because Bitcoin maybe is not a direct corollary to the economy. So when it created any red flags around an inflationary like situation, right? Like if you just printed $10 trillion and dumped it in the US economy, it would F everything up, right? But if you just kind of only were buying Bitcoin because it's not really in the economy, because it's not, there's to Mike's point, there's no utility for it that people are trading it really and actually extracting money.
Not at volume,
well, I think,
but it is happening.
Right. But like if you were doing that over a short period of time though, to dump money into it and take it and then strip that out, you're essentially not trying to do it for profit, but you're trying to strip wealth away from the rest of the population.
With any commodity though, right? And that's what Saudi Arabia has been doing with oil forever.
Yeah, oil.
Right.
That was actually a silver thing. Was with the Hunt brothers was a big thing that happened for a while. I think the important thing to learn there, though, Dan, is no matter how, let's say you owned 20 of the 21 million Bitcoin, you can't change the rules of the protocol and how it is issued and how it is governed. I think that is the deciding factor versus if you have Ethereum or even like for dollar's sake. You all know the wealthy politicians who can influence policy.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you there, where it's like, again, previous like 2018, I would have been like, yeah, Bitcoin, which I was like, I just don't see how it does anything. But now, like, we know that people around the world are manipulating things that we just took for granted, that we're like, oh, that's an institution. Like, we know that stuff's getting manipulated. Commodity prices, dollars and cents, economies are all getting manipulated for better and for worse. So there's not really a good argument to say Bitcoin could get manipulated, because everything's getting manipulated at some level.
Right. But there's only 3.125 getting issued every 10 minutes. I think that on a weekly basis is like 900.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to manipulate it, they're going to manipulate it one way.
Yeah.
Right.
I do think, though, while it still needs to be transferred to like a fiat currency to be usable, that is kind of the issue. Right. Like,
yeah. So hold on, I'll just touch on that real quick. I think, the leading economists that I listen to would say for something to become a money that isn't government issued, it would go in steps. The first one being a proven store of value, then medium of exchange, then unit of account. So like store of value first, prove it has some kind of utility over a long time frame. Then people start trading it, which happens, in other countries. Like you can go to Starbucks in El Salvador and pay with it over your phone, right? Or like I could hold up a QR code and pay you over the webcam if I wanted to. And then eventually, once it becomes ingrained enough, then it's unit of account, which is different than the monetary policies we've had historically. Who knows if that'll be true or not, but that would be my counter argument to what you're saying.
Yeah. Can you send me your QR code real quick?
I'll send you one that I received.
No. I want the sending one.
So I guess for the average person, real estate investor, someone kind of look at like long-term, investing, like should they just go and buy
I'll add one
Bitcoin
thing.
Or go for it.
I'll add one thing and then we'll do this. I've actually taken a Bitcoin-backed loan to buy real estate. And so I think that might be applicable, to real estate investors going forward. If you're it might be not be applicable to someone who doesn't have any Bitcoin, because obviously you need that to put up the loan for the collateral. But the collateral is honestly like a little bit better than real estate. There could be a day where you go to a bank and you lend, and you say, I have this Bitcoin, I'd like to put up as collateral.
Sure.
And you give me the money.
Do you have like a condition where like if say Bitcoin drops below a certain price, you have to pay that off?
So you'd either have to put more money in to get your LTV back to where you wanted it to, or it would be in an escrow account where they can just simply take the money. Yeah. Instead of having to go through the foreclosure process of a house, you can literally just get the money. So if you're a lender or a hard money lender, like I would almost look at this as another avenue to generate some money, because right now, if you could look at the leading companies, they're about what a hard money company would be, like 2 points origination, 12% interest only during the duration of the loan. But if I took out $100,000, I'd have to put up $200,000 into Bitcoin as collateral. Yeah. So they're over collateralized on their part. Right? Yeah. So they don't. It's like there's no risk to them.
It's like a big billionaire like a Jeff Bezos. Like he is maybe worth $200 million, and he can stake that to go buy $100 million yacht without selling it, because they're like, yeah, Jeff's good for it, but he'll put up his stake in Amazon.
If Amazon drops below his price of whatever, he'll have to come up with the money.
They're gonna be like, give us that yacht.
Exactly. It's like a whole thing. On my trip, I watched the first season of Succession. That's like the whole thing is like in the first couple episodes is the stock market tanks, and they have this huge deck called that was levered against the company because it dropped below the price that was part of their loan agreement, right?
Oh, was that that's like the opening?
That's like
season?
The first like
the
real
problem?
Conflict that goes on in that, and so they have to bring on like this private equity to bail them out, and that's what causes like the family.
And they're worried about their inheritance.
But so I guess, and with your Bitcoin loan, it would be the same fundamental principle, I'm assuming.
Right. I didn't have, it is. It exactly is. And like, that's why you have to be very conservative with your LTVs. Like I did a 50% and I did a very small portion of what I actually own, because if you had to put up more collateral, you'd be fucked if you didn't have it.
Yeah.
But
it's a tool.
I was able to get basically $100,000, and I didn't have to get an appraiser. I didn't have to, I got all the money up front, no draw schedule. So like I might use this avenue going forward in my real estate deals just because it's an easier process and sometimes using a hard money loan.
Super awesome for like flipping and double closes and shit. Why not stake it? But you're right. Don't over lever, just like with anything. Like if you were to go get true hard money loans, don't over lever by getting 20 hard money loans when the market's kind of dicey. Like stay whatever you're comfortable with in your actual financial situation. But like it's sick. It's almost like just like a quick line of credit because Dylan, I know you're not planning to sell your cryptocurrency at any large scale. So it's just sitting there. Like might as well use it without having to pay capital gains on the use of it.
Yeah. And one of the propositions from, it's been theorized, is like they'll get rid of capital gains on Bitcoin, right? Like it would be used as like a currency and not a commodity. So like if that's the case, then you just made 30% on your,
see, but so honestly, this is where I think all the shit's crooked, is when they start like saying stuff like that, and you have all these politicians that are really pushing it, and you have these people of influence that are really pushing Bitcoin and saying we're going to get rid of capital gains, we're going to do all sort of stuff. The average person, that's great. Behind the curtain, they're all doing that for their own benefit, right? And they're like, we've been accumulating this shit. I've been rich for the last 20 years, and I've just been dumping money into Bitcoin and other things. And they go, now I'm in a position of power. I have an audience. I'm going to influence the value of this by going and shilling it to the general public. And then I'm going to go, oh, and actually too, we're going to get rid of capital gains tax because I want to make sure that I get rich as fuck off the stuff that I've been pushing forever. Like like in my mind, it's no different than when people go and like leak news about stocks can influence the price, except that that's regulated by the SEC. The Bitcoin stuff isn't regulated at all. And that's where it gets real sketchy.
Okay, I agree with you. Like, because I do think that exists. But what's the difference in politicians pushing initiatives that drive the economy in different directions? Like the whole like go green in these certain industries where, oh wow, they're invested.
They incentivize
they're invested in
right.
they're invested in these companies, and they created a whole nother economy for them to get super wealthy because they said, oh, wind farms are a really good idea.
Totally, and that's a problem as well, right? That's why Nancy Pelosi went in and somehow is a fucking genius in whatever inside trading she does, right? Like it's all bullshit. But at least with those things, they're generally behind companies that produce a product that can hopefully bring a larger value than just their stock price, right? Whereas Bitcoin, it doesn't bring any additional outside value except for to the people that are holders of it, right?
I mean, you have to realize like it is now the 8th biggest asset in the world as like a market cap.
It's bigger than silver.
Like, yeah, right. And it's only a couple of companies that are bigger than it, and that trend is just increasing. So yes, as it sits today, does it do volume to make a difference? No, but that's not the trend. The trend is going where it's growing exponentially. And not to get like, I don't know, frooey, because I know we don't do that on the show, but there are people who've been career politicians for 40 years who've pushed the stocks, done insider trading, done ESG initiatives, who are honestly, in my opinion, piece of shit human beings.
Dirtbags.
Like, I don't know them personally, but this is what I'm seeing. 80% of like the current circulating Bitcoin is owned by a small number of wallets. A lot of them have put up the initiatives, like El Salvador is a good example. Like they basically did that economy on there, like it was self-funded from like a donor. So the people who own this, the large wealth, aren't the current political establishment. Maybe they can use some of their newfound wealth for things that aren't the status quo. If that's good or bad, I don't know, but at least it's a change.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's interesting because this is like, I would say where the libertarian part of Bitcoin gets interesting, because there's this kind of general view where I would say like people that are really into Bitcoin, they believe in each other, and like they believe that they will take down the establishment. And I tend to come from a view of like, I don't believe in most people. I think most people are kind of dirtbags, and they all have their own self-interest at heart. All politicians are fucking dirtbags. Everyone that's trying to like, get this message going, there's always some kind of self-interest in it, right? If they even producing this show, our self-interest is we want you to like join the Scale community. I want you to come with me and do deals together. We don't do this like for fun. It fucking costs money for us to do this. So we have a motive behind it. Just like everyone that promotes Bitcoin or everything else, they have to have a selfish motive. Otherwise they wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. So there's a book, if anyone's like listening to this, like where the fuck do I start? Because there's a lot of stuff out there. The Bitcoin Standard is like probably what I would recommend most people go to. But in that book is the first time, probably World War II, World War I, they had to fund wars basically with taxpayer dollars. They had war bonds, right? Like they really didn't do all that shit. And then we've only had like this military industrial complex, like because we could print our own money. Now we just print however much money we want to fund the wars all over the country, whether it be Ukraine or any other wars we've had. If you're on a sound monetary policy and Bitcoin does become the world reserve currency, you can't print more of it.
Yeah.
So like it's almost like this humanitarian. Thank you. I did out the part where this sounded like it.
No, keep it in.
Where,
keep it in.
Like you could it could almost be a more peaceful transition if you're on a currency that doesn't influence other people just based on where you live in the world. I don't know. So like maybe I'm too optimistic, but like that is.
I was hoping that we'd keep killing people for profit.
Well, no. So now what we're gonna do is fewer people are gonna kill more people for their own profit instead of it being like the country's profit is gonna be specifically for them.
They're gonna build robots.
That's true. Yeah, AI is gonna come and fuck everyone anyway. Way before 21.
So we're gonna starve them out, dude. That's what we're doing.
So, but anyway, so I guess for the average person, you know, I guess is the play. They should just like buy Bitcoin. And also, if you're such a maximalist or whatever they call it, why don't you just sell all your shit and put it in Bitcoin?
Good point.
So I have sold real estate to buy Bitcoin. No. I mean, so that's the thing. You know,
I think there are people like that. Totally. Dylan's not that guy though.
Yeah, there are people like that, but to be honest, like we're not there to the point where Bitcoin produces cash flow. Like we're just not there. It might one day. Like if maybe I can lend mine out someday and get income that way. But I like real estate for diversity reasons. And
you don't need cash flow. You just need more internet schmickles, bro. That's what it's all about.
What's your plan, Mike? Do you have a crypto or Bitcoin?
No.
Plan?
So because here's my problem is I opened my Coinbase account the other day, and I was buying Bitcoin back in 2017 when it was like $1,600, and so now I look at it at like 90 grand, and I'm like I basically like the guy that used to flip houses 15 years ago and is looking at house values now. I was like, that's a shitty fucking
Nothing's
deal.
a good deal
that's
anymore.
That's how I feel when I look at it.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
I have a sunk cost bias.
I have a I don't want to say like I missed the boat sort of thing, or it's like in hindsight, maybe I should have kept stuff. But it's funny because when I first started buying it, I felt like I was putting an incredible amount of money into it because at the time for me it was. And I think maximum that I actually transacted was like $12,000. That like went from my account as cash into Bitcoin and Ethereum and a couple of other coins that I bought. And so with how everything's grown, that'd be worth like not nearly as much as my real estate has been worth, or the amount of money that I have made by using that money that was in crypto, which was kind of like my initial marketing dollars that I spent when Dan and I started business. And so, I don't know, like I could do it as like an investment, but like the investment myself has paid off significantly more than if I had just parked it in there and I was a miserable fucking prick for the last 5 years working an engineering job, maybe want to kill myself. Yeah.
I'm not arguing that. If you can run up a business that spits off hundreds of thousands of dollars per year,
right,
and you can keep doing that, keep doing that. But I'm saying if you have excess capital, if you're a company that produces net income and you're just sitting there with it, kind of like the Michael Saylor example, don't put it in treasuries. Don't just leave it in a checking account. Put it somewhere where it's going to grow for you.
All right. So everyone got tired of Dylan being Mr. Smarty Pants over there. And so his system crashed. So we're going to log off here. Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for listening. Not a lot of real estate talk today. But honestly, if you're looking at kind of the big picture, I do think that it probably makes sense over the next 4 years and a bit to explore alternative assets as well to keep some excess cash, especially if you're running like a real estate business that's spitting out some solid cash flow. You need to put that money somewhere. Maybe it's crypto, maybe it's stocks, maybe it's what else people buy. I don't know, something else. Fucking Pokemon cards, Beanie Babies, is that a thing? Probably. But hope you enjoyed that. If you want to help us grow the show, please share with your friends. It's the easiest way to help us grow is if you tell somebody else, give it a listen. And that way we get some more dedicated listeners that help us continuing getting in front of more people and spreading some good word around real estate in a time where everyone's trying to buy small businesses that they're really just going to fail and bankrupt themselves within the next 18 months, for being honest. So thanks everybody listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.